The Triangle factory was located just a half block to the east of Washington Square Park in the heart of Greenwich Village, and remarkably, the building that once housed that factory still stands, and in fact, it's behind me right now. As our look back at the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire continues, we want to take you inside that building, both the building as it stood 100 years ago when that terrible fire broke out, and also a look inside the building today to give you an idea of just what those 146 factory workers faced as the flames were lapping at their heels. The date was March 25th, 1911, a Saturday, which, like most Saturdays for the 500-plus employees of the Triangle factory, was a work day. Sometime around 4:40 or 4:45, someone dropped a lit cigarette or match on the 8th floor of the Ash building, home to the Triangle Company. It quickly spread to one of the many scrap bins on the factory floor. Between the fabric in the bin, other scraps strewn about the factory floor, and a host of oil canisters there to keep the sewing machines running, the flames quickly spread. Workers on 8 began rushing to get out. Someone made a call to the 10th floor, the work area of Triangle owners Max Blank and Isaac Harris, warning them of the dangers below.
They went up to the roof, and then some NYU law students in the building next door, which had a higher roof than the Triangle factory, rigged up ladders, and they were able to escape.
But no one warned the people on the building's 9th floor, where 200 workers were manning their sewing machines.
Sonia Wysotsky, 17.
Essie Bernstein, 19.
Antoinetta Pasqualiccio, 16.
The first sign of trouble on 9 came only when the smoke and flames started moving in. Workers turned to water buckets kept full as a precaution. They weren't enough. That's when the panic began. The women and girls who made up the bulk of the workforce rushed to their usual stairwell. But Triangle kept 40-gallon drums of sewing machine oil there, and the smoke and flames had gotten there first.
It spread quickly because of those bins full of scraps underneath the sewing machine tables that the oil was dripping down onto from the sewing machines.
The workers retreated to an emergency stairwell. It was locked. One of the windows had a fire escape, but it didn't reach the ground, nor could it handle the heat or the crisis. The part of the fire escape that did not collapse withered, dropping workers 9 floors to the ground, and the others had to turn back again. Their last hope was the Washington Street side of the building. Fire trucks arrived just 5 minutes after the inferno was reported. They began to spray the top floors of the building, and the people now gathered by the windows, trying to keep the flames at bay. But as the workers trapped on 9 soon realized, those trucks had a fatal flaw. Their ladders only reached floor 6, 30 feet short. So the workers began to jump.
The victims on the 9th floor faced the choice of either being burned alive, since there were no exits, or jumping to their deaths. Very similar to what happened on 9/11.
Ida Brodsky, 15.
Gussie Schiffman, 18.
Josephine Camerata, 17.
As the flames continued to expand and engulf the Ash building, workers began to congregate in places like this, right outside windows, 9 floors above the streets of Greenwich, and then with the flames lapping at their heels, they made decisions that so many of us today would find unthinkable and unimaginable. Firefighters did what they could trying to catch the falling workers, but the force of their plunge ripped the nets from their hands. Some even fell the metal plates that led to underground cellars.
The sheer terror these women must have been facing to choose between burning to death in a building with no protection, no one to help them or save them, or to jump out the window, knowing, because others had jumped before them, that that was it, right? I think that, to me, is something that it's hard for me, as someone who's written about this and studied this, to get out of my mind.
Police officers would later say they knew some of the girls whose lives ended by their feet. They were the same girls they had arrested during the workers' strike just a year and a half before. Just 18 minutes after it was sparked, the fire was put out. But in that 18 minutes, 53 workers either jumped or fell from the windows. 19 jumped into empty elevator shafts and died. More than 20 slipped from the crippled fire escape. Another 50 or more died on the factory floor. In all, 146 people died. 123 were women. About half of those were teenagers.
Such young women in the flower of their lives in such great numbers is so tragic, and to have their communities have the impact of that loss.
Within a few minutes, large crowds had gathered on the streets below, watching in horror as the scene unfolded. The crowd knew well the conditions workers faced inside. The 9th floor of the building is now the NYU Biology Department, but its dimensions remain the same. 200 people worked in this room when the fire broke out, and the room was much tighter. Little room to move around, no way to get to an exit without walking around or over everyone else. Workers at other garment factories, some of which had seen their own smaller fires, had gotten key improvements in working conditions following that 1909 strike.
There were limits to how much cloth like that could be held and how it was held. There were also limits to, escapes and windows and air condition, all of those kind of conditions. Triangle didn't have any of that.
One of the reasons people had trouble escaping the building was that the doors opened in instead of out. So as soon as a crowd gathered in front of a door, they couldn't get it open.
Sarah Sabasowitz, 17.
Josephine Corlisi, 31.
Jenny Pildescu, 18.
The dead were taken to a makeshift morgue on the East River where distraught family members tried and, in some cases, failed to identify their loved ones. The fire dominated headlines in the city, many demanding justice for the 146 victims. A week and a half later, 400,000 New Yorkers turned out for a funeral procession for the unidentified victims. 1 out of every 10 city residents was there. That procession and the burial arrangements for victims, organized in part by the International Ladies Garment Workers Union, the fire, they pledged, would lead to changes.
The Maltese family, a mother and 2 daughters in that family died in the fire.
I know Vincent Maltese and spoken about growing up in a family with no women, right? That impact from that fire.
The Triangle's owners were hauled into court, charged for the locked stairwell door. But they were found not guilty. No one could prove they knew it was locked. The mission to identify every fire victim never ended. And just a few weeks ago, nearly 100 years after their deaths, their names and faces finally came to light. And the push for workplace reforms and workers' rights continues today as well. It began the moment the flames went out.
The Triangle Fire is one of these, I think, critical moments in American history, which unfortunately, as a tragedy, forces the public to make a choice and draw a line. Right. And really the issue was, what is the minimum level of workplace safety and health issues that workers deserve?
And as part of today's commemorative events here in Greenwich Village, the New York Fire Department provided the crowd that gathered yet another perspective on the challenges that so many workers faced 100 years ago today. They raised the ladder on one of their engines 6 floors up along the Ash building. 6 floors as high as the ladders got 100 years ago. Still 30 feet and several floors short of where it needed to be to help those women evacuate safely. As our look back at the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire continues tonight, we look at the days, weeks, and months that followed the fire, the lessons that were learned, and the changes that it helped bring about, changes that have impacted how America does business just about every day since. Our coverage from Greenwich Village continues right after this. Stay with us.